Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to the EduphoreIAS series. So today we are starting, as you know the date is 5th July and we are starting with the Hindu front page. Fine. So first page you see the main article of the day is related to SEO, and yesterday we had discussed about SEO and this proposed meeting, and that that our Prime Minister or India actually hosted this summit of SEO basically. Fine. And alongside that I mentioned yesterday that there will be 4 major documents to be signed, or the agreements you can say to be signed in this agreement, yesterday's agreement. So of course there were 4. First is New Delhi Declaration. The other documents were related to the digital payments. Fine. And another was related to the agreement on countering radicalization. 3 and 4th one was on economic cooperation, which India has not signed actually. Yesterday even we discussed that India is not going to sign because of BRI, Belt and Road Initiative of the China, and along under BRI, as I mentioned, that there is a project called CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is basically passing through Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and POK is an integral part of not just Jammu and Kashmir but integral part of India. So that's why India has opposed this, because this goes against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation. Fine, especially ours, because China is interfering or intervening in our territorial matters. Okay. So that's why India has not signed this 4th one, the 4th agreement. Fine. So I hope you have the idea that 3 of the 4 agreements have been signed, but one that is related to economic cooperation, India has preferred to opting out of this agreement. Fine. So SEO calls for multipolar world. Now, what is multipolar world? Remember, we time and again listen about bipolar, multipolar. Fine. So bipolar, like 2 poles, means 2 blocks of countries, let us say, or 2 group of countries or 2 countries. Fine. So bi means 2. Double. Multi means 2 or more than 2. Fine. Not 2 but more than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So SEO believes in multipolarity. Fine. That there should be, there should not be, again let us say, Cold War kind of era or superpower era where a single country is basically ruling of the whole world. Fine. So they believe in having the, let us say, rules and coexistence of multiple countries together. Fine. With cooperation. Okay. So you see, indicating a lack of consensus, India stays out of the statements on economic cooperation and on China's Belt and Road Initiative, owing to projects in POK. SEO calls for cooperation on digital payments and countering radicalization. Fine. So SEO has called for digital payments and countering radicalization, and India has opted out on economic cooperation agreement. Fine. So what our Prime Minister said basically, that there should be no place for double standards on serious matters like terrorism. Fine. Remember, another achievement of this year is, of course, Iran has joined SEO, and now the SEO comprises of total of 9 members. Iran has joined. Okay. So after joining, remember today the SEO grouping now comprises China, India, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Remember, out of the 5 Central Asian republics, जिसके prefix में तान आता है, like one country is not the part of the SEO group, not the permanent part of or member of this group yet, and that is, you see the missing one, and that is Turkmenistan. Fine. So odd one out. Whenever you get a question related to the members of the SCO, you need to keep in mind that out of 5 Central Asian republics, Turkmenistan is not the part of this bloc group. Okay? You see rest 4, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are there. Fine? And in this subsequent paragraphs, basically this agreements thing has been discussed. I have already told you that 3 agreements have been signed. One, India have preferred, operate out related to the economic cooperation, and that is the same thing mentioned because of Pakistan occupied Kashmir and China's interference in our sovereignty and territorial matters. Okay, so that is sufficient as far as this article is concerned. So, what our Prime Minister further said in this SCO summit, because we are hosting this, so as a president of this, better connectivity not only enhances mutual trade, but also fosters mutual trust. However, in these efforts, it is essential to afford the basic principles of SCO chapter, particularly respecting the sovereignty and regional integrity of the member nation states. You can see that through these 2 lines what Prime Minister actually wanted to convey. Fine? Okay. So apart from this, on the left side and right side, as I always suggest you, try to have a look at what is important and then focus on that particular article, the inside pages, but this side nothing is as important today. Fine. So Haryana allows restaurants to stay open 24/7. Fine, just keep in mind this much. And bunker clearing work in Manipur to begin today. Okay, even that is not that much important, just what's going on in Manipur, that simply we can keep tab on that. Okay, today this function has been changed, so let us just scroll down here. Okay, nothing more important on this page particularly. Let us go now. So India has again launched, few last month we had discussed that with Canada we are not having a very cordial relation at this point of time because of some Khalistan related issues and protests especially going on there, and again India lodges protests with the Canada over Khalistan posters. Fine, so that is sufficient. Okay, then these are the this is the local page. Fine. Okay, local page from Delhi, so not that important. Those who are from Delhi, of course, you should be aware of what's going on around here, but not that much, so important for others. Okay, now begins this. Of course, politics and politics only, so we can simply skip these pages and let us directly land to the editorial page. And there are lots of, there are 2-3 important articles today on the editorial page. Okay, so let us discuss one by one quickly. So first is an incomplete reform. This is about GST. This article is about GST. An incomplete reform. Despite gains, the indirect tax regime is yet to become truly simple or efficient. Fine? Indirect tax regime, we are talking about GST basically. Fine? So India's tries with goods and services, you can see, launched at a special midnight parliament session, completed 6 years this month. It was implemented from the 1st of July 2017. Fine? So that's why it has completed 6 years. On the 1st of July 2023, Makhluk as a finance minister said, or emphasized that the GST has moved the country towards a unified market from a situation where each state mandated different indirect tax structures and procedures while interstate borders were marked out. So of course this was the purpose. Now as the name says, goods and service tax. So it should be good as well as simple tax regime as well. So focus was on integrating the indirect tax regime into simpler one, fine, or you can say the unified market, integration of unified market across the states. So this is what finance minister has said, that to a greater extent GST has moved the country towards that, in that direction, in unified market. Okay, introduced soon after the demonetization shock. So demonetization, 8th November, I hope you all remember, 2016 year. The GST was viewed as another disruptor for the informal economy and its initial technical structure and procedural challenges took a while to sort out. Of course, because of all these issues, implementational issues, it took time to get settled. That all businesses with annual turnover of 5 crore will have to generate invoices starting this August. So this is a good thing that none of them have presented, and that there has been no ostensible pushback from smaller businesses over this indicates that firms have gradually embraced the change. Fine? If firms may gradually change to embrace here. The revenue department cracked down on fake invoicing and other techniques deployed by tax evaders may compel the few outliers to fall in line too. Fine. So alongside this, so you see that today the sellers or the business enterprise or person are not now ostensibly pushing back or resenting this kind of change. So of course it has become the part of the system today. Fine. And people are more or less accepting it. Okay. Further, you see, tightening compliance and post-pandemic rebound in economic activity have helped improve revenues from the GST. This was said by our Honorable Finance Minister. Tightening compliance and post-pandemic rebound in economic activity have somewhere helped in achieving greater revenues from the GST. Okay. In the late 2021, when the Council set up a ministerial group to rationalize the unwieldy multiple rate structure and enhance tax inflows, this during see the GST revenues crossed 1.6 lakh crore, only fourth such occasion in its 72 months existence. So in the last 6 years, you see this is the fourth time that GST has crossed this revenue generation of 1.6 lakh crore. Fine. In the months of June, the last month only. Fine. So this is only the fourth month time or fourth month out of 72 months. Lifting the average collection in the first quarter of this year to nearly 1.7 lakh crore, a healthy 12% over last year's KP. So 12% of increment or this increase has been registered in the indirect tax revenue generation, especially through the GST. Right? So the recent revenue buoyancy is when your revenue is increasing with respect to increasing, let us say, GDP rate. Right? As your economy growing, so do your revenue generation as well. Even if it may face a blip if consumption growth falters and slowing global economy bodes well for states that were worried about their fiscal capacity after 5 years of assured revenues through GST compensation expired last July. But remember, of course, initially, जो भी states हैं, because they were apprehensive of that they might lose the revenue generation, fine, that they were getting before the implementation of the GST, fine, so this was mandated for 5 years that they would be compensated for their loss in revenues, fine, and that's why it is called GST compensation cess basically, which expired actually the last July, but government has extended it for further 5 years period, and now it has been extended up to 31st March 2026, fine, in order to compensate the states for their loss in revenue. And this was extended because of GST compensation cess levies have been extended till at least March 2026 instead of the initial 5-year tenure due to transitory shock of COVID-19 lockdowns on revenues. Dispute resolution remains a share in government borrowing that is around 40%. So this is a very good statistics to keep in mind. Fine. The share of the states. Firstly, they mobilize almost 1/3 of the total revenue of the India combined government, central and state. Apart from that, they spend 60% of combined government expenditure or combined expenditure, and they also have a share in government borrowing, that is debts, almost equivalent to 40%. Fine. Given the size of the fiscal operation of the states, an up-to-date understanding of their finances is critical in order to draw evidence-based inference on the fiscal situation of the country. In short, an analysis of the emerging fiscal situation of the states by examining key data on state finances from individual state budgets for 2023-24. So in this article, writer is basically making analysis of emerging fiscal situation of the states by examining key data on state fiscal situation or health from individual states' budgets for the year 2023-24, the current year's budget. Right? So firstly, the fiscal imbalance and consolidation is talking about imbalance and consolidation. So he's saying that as we complete the first quarter of the fiscal year, first quarter means April, May, June, right? This is the first quarter of 2023 means current fiscal year or financial year. It becomes evident that the increase in general government deficit and debt that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic has begun to recede. So this is a good sign that overall the general government debt and deficits, general government, refer to the general government. Remember, I am talking about both the central and the states government, right? Combined. So both, this general government deficits, fiscal deficit particularly, fiscal deficit, I hope you know that fiscal deficit is nothing but total expenditure minus total revenue excluding the borrowings, right? Excluding borrowings. Fine. So fiscal deficit and debt is basically the debt to GDP ratio, that how much debt we have with respect in comparison to the overall GDP. Fine. So there have been significant post-pandemic fiscal corrections at the union and state levels after pandemic COVID-19 pandemic shock. At the union level, you see the fiscal deficit declined from 9.1% of GDP in 2020 and 21 to 5.9% in 2023-24. This is B, that is budget estimate. According to the budget for this year's this 2023-24 fiscal year, the fiscal deficit of the central government would be 5.9%. But this is estimated one. It might be revised later as well. Remember, this is not the final one. All state fiscal deficit was 4.1% of GDP in 2020 and 21. It further declined to 3.24% of GDP in 2022-23. Revised estimate of the major states for the year 2023 is expected to be around 2.9% of GDP. So, like central government, for which the estimated budget estimate for this current fiscal year is for the fiscal deficit is 4.1%, and same fiscal deficit for the according to the budget estimates of the states, it is going to be around 2.9% of the GDP. Fine. So this sharp reduction in fiscal deficit suggests that we cannot have an impressionistic view of the fiscal situation of the country. So what is impressionistic view? Impressionistic view, remember, is a generalized view or general view. Fine. That is idea of something. Fine. Having idea of something, but not the particular view. Fine. Or let us say specific view. Fine. So why he is saying such thing? Especially on the finances of the states, he is saying that we could have only generalist view or general view and not the specific one. Why so? Because due to the absence of aggregation of individual state budgets data, a consolidated view of general government finances is not readily available. Of course, because for that particular view, fine, a particular analysis, we need to have an aggregation of the whole states of India's budget data. Fine, that is a mammoth task. Every year, this data becomes available only after the publication of RBI annual study on state finances. Aggregating fiscal data from individual state budgets is a rigorous and time-consuming process. Fine. Okay. So you see, hence the timeline of this publication. So the RBI, which comes with the annual publication, annual study on state finances report, it basically publishes this during the second half of the fiscal year. Remember, we have two halves of, we have 4 quarters, fine, in a fiscal year of 3 months each, and 2 halves, that is H1 and H2, means 6 months each. So 12 months, that's how we divide basically or talk in economic sense. Fine? H1 is first half, H2 is second half. So this RBI report gets published in the second half of the fiscal year. Fine? Means after 6 months, means probably in the 3rd quarters. Okay? Or 4th quarter even. So the analysis here is based on the data collected from the individual budgets of 17 major states. So remember, this analysis is based on not the RBI data, because this is going to be published in the second half of the fiscal year, but currently we are in the first half and we have just completed first quarter of the first half, remember, because first half comprises of 2 quarters, okay, first and second. So the whatever writer has written or discussed or talking about is based on the analysis of the data collected from these individual states of 17 major states of India. These states are responsible for more than 90% of the combined spending of all states. Thus, fiscal issues emerging out of their budgets are representative of the state finances in India. So he is saying since these 17 major states represents basically or accounts for almost 90% of the combined spending of all the states in the country. So this would be a better, sample or better representative. Their budgets would be better representative of the state finances in India. The analysis shows that these states together have managed to contain their fiscal deficits. That's the positive thing. So this fiscal consolidation is significant in many ways. Why it is significant or important? First, states in aggregate manage to be fiscally prudent or wise, you can say. So why consolidating the fiscal deficit is important? That's what the author is focusing on. Okay. So this is prudent or wise despite a significant contraction in the revenues even during the peak of COVID-19. Second reason is emergency provision for health spending and livelihood during the COVID-19 pandemic was not easy and required union state fiscal consolidation coordination, of course. Third, states were able to reprioritize expenditure and quickly contain the fiscal deficit. Fine. Fourth, the reduction in fiscal deficit is combination of expenditure side adjustments and improved GST collection and higher tax devolution due to buoyant central revenues. Fine. So fourth reason is the reduction in fiscal deficit took place because of the combination of expenditure side reforms. Means you are cutting down on unproductive or wasteful expenditures. Fine. Especially the revenue expenditures. And improved goods and services GST collection. We have just seen this smaller article how the GST is improving over the time and how the revenues being going of course upward over the time. And fifth and the last reason is non-GST revenues are also showing signs of recovery after the pandemic in most states. So non-GST revenues apart from this indirect taxes, fine, let us say there are many things which are of course at this point of time out of the GST regime. Let us say petroleum, so excise on petroleum products, let us say, fine, and even custom duties and all. So fiscal challenges. Now what are the fiscal challenges? These are the good things first. Now what are the issues? So fiscal challenges. However, there are significant fiscal challenges that need correction in the short to medium term time frame. The most critical being containing the revenue deficit of a state. Now we have discussed about the fiscal deficit. Now what exactly is the revenue deficit? So revenue deficit is nothing but revenue minus expenditure. Fine. Total revenue, what the state getting as a total revenue or generating as a total revenue minus total expenditure it is incurring basically. Fine. So this is called revenue minus expenditure. So mismatching, let us say you have less of revenue, you are earning less and expending more, means you have deficit on the account of revenue. Fine. So the reduction in fiscal deficit has not been accompanied by a corresponding reduction in revenue deficit. This is what he is saying. Though this is a good thing that over the time, especially post-pandemic, we are registering or we have noticed reduction in the state's fiscal deficit alongside the central government's deficit, fiscal deficit as well. But this is not not accompanied by the similar reduction in revenue deficit of the states. So what are the data he is quoting? Out of the 17 major states, 13 states have deficit in the revenue account. See, out of these 13 states now, fiscal deficit is in 7 states are primarily driven by revenue deficit. So out of the 17 states for which he has, he is making analysis or using as a sample study or sample states. So out of the 17 states, 13 states have deficit on the revenue account. Remember, means their expenditure is far more than the revenue they are basically earning or getting. Fine. Apart from that, out of now these 13 states, 7 states are such where this fiscal deficit in the 7 states out of these 13 states are primarily driven by revenue deficit, because already they are facing revenue deficit. Fine. Huge, you can say, or this large scale revenue deficit. So therefore this larger scale revenue deficit is getting manifested in revenue this fiscal deficit as well, because if you already have higher revenue deficit, means you are going to incur higher fiscal deficit, because ultimately you see that fiscal deficit is nothing but total expenditure minus total revenue, fine, excluding borrowings. Okay, so of course this expenditure and revenue component getting somewhere is included in the fiscal deficit calculation as well, as we are talking here about revenue and expenditure, the same things but the different methodologically. Fine. So of course revenue deficit is somewhere part of your fiscal deficit. So that's why if there is something, or if there is a large revenue deficit for a particular state, then of course is going to drive your fiscal deficit upwards as well. Fine. So the states. So what are these? Which are these 7 states? The 7 states are Andhra Pradesh, Haryana, Punjab, Kerala, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal. Remember. So they also have larger debt to GSDP ratio as well. So all these 7 states not just have a higher revenue deficit and therefore fiscal deficit, but also higher debt to GSDP, that is gross state domestic product. So they have also higher debt to GSDP ratio. And today Punjab has the second largest debt in the country with respect to the states. Okay. So just keep in mind this much of. It's a very good article, both theoretically as well as lots of data facts in as well. So a very good insight related to the states fiscal industry. So it is true that the mere presence of revenue deficit cannot be considered as a sign of fiscal profligacy. Profligacy is unwise expenditure, when we spend recklessly, fine, without giving much thought to it. So it's not a prudent one, but reverse of that, unwise spending. It is true that pressure on revenue expenditure was high during COVID-19. Indeed, a more detailed and careful analysis of the rise in revenue deficit of the state is also necessary. However, increasing revenue deficit driving the fiscal imbalance has long-run fiscal implications, and there is need to correct this imbalance in the revenue account. Of course, so he's saying that this deficits, especially in the revenue account, has, and therefore in fiscal deficit has long-term fiscal impacts as well, and therefore the need of R is to correct this imbalance in the first revenue account. Because once you correct revenue account deficit, of course it will get manifested in fiscal deficit as well. So of course ultimately you are ending up with lowering your fiscal deficit. For these 7 states, their specific share of revenue deficit in fiscal deficit for 2023-24 are, see, Andhra Pradesh, the ratio is for revenue deficit to fiscal deficit. So out of the total fiscal deficit for these 7 states, the share of revenue deficit in that fiscal deficit is how much? For Andhra Pradesh, that is almost 41%. See, Haryana 51%, far ahead. Kerala 60%, and the top state here is Punjab 70.7%, almost 71%. Now you got the point that why Punjab has the second highest debt to GSDP ratio in the country, right? Because your fiscal deficit for this year, revenue deficit out of total fiscal deficit comprises, let us say Punjab has 100 rupees of fiscal deficit, then out of this 100 rupees, almost 71 paisa, fine, this rupee of course, Punjab, I'm just rounding off 70.7, let us say 71 rupee out of this 100 rupee has, this is what? Revenue deficit out of 100 rupees of fiscal deficit. So you see what is the share of almost more than even 2/3, fine. So that's the reason that why Punjab is the second largest debt to GSDP ratio. Then after that, Rajasthan 40% almost, Tamil Nadu 41% almost, and West Bengal 47% almost. These are the shares of fiscal revenue deficit out of the total fiscal deficit. Fine. So an assessment of the successive finance commission since the 12th finance commission identified 3 states, particularly Kerala, Punjab, and West Bengal, as fiscally stressed. The number of states that are now fiscally stressed has gone up from 3 earlier to 7 today. Fine. Increased to 7, measured in terms of the level of their revenue deficit, not fiscal deficit. Fine. So what does it mean for general government, means central and state government, macroeconomic stability? It's a very good question. That what does it mean then for, or what does it implies for the overall general government macroeconomic stability or macroeconomic stability of the country? A sense of this can be made when the following fiscal numbers are considered. The combined fiscal deficit of these states is 3.71% of the GST, when the all states average for the same is 2.9%. So you see that combined fiscal deficit of these 7 states only stands at 3.71%, while the all states average at the India level stands at 2.9%. So you see how far ahead they are. Their combined revenue deficit, on the other hand, is 2.15% of GDP, when all the state revenue deficit is just 0.78%. Fine. So again, they are far ahead in terms of revenue deficit. Just the 7 states, in comparison to all the states of India in terms of revenue deficit. So their combined debt to GDP ratio is higher than the Finance Commission recommended debt for all states for the year 2023 as well, 3 and 4 as well, because according to Finance Commission, their the state's debt to GDP ratio should be in the range of 20%, and the central government debt should be in the range of 40%. Means this combined, they should not be more than 60% of the overall GDP of the country. Fine. So these states together contribute around 40% to India's GDP. These 7 states we are talking about. In this context, to ensure higher state-specific growth, the fiscal stability of the state finances is critical. Some of these states have also been big drivers of public capital expenditure and favored investment destinations of private investors as well. Right? So of course some of these states are, of course you see they are the bigger states. Right? Okay. Now the framework of revenue deficit consolidation. So focus of the author is on revenue deficit consolidation per se, and not entirely on the fiscal deficit, because he believes that once we will be able to this consolidate our revenue deficit, then of course ultimately this will be reflected in the overall consolidation of your fiscal deficit. So primary cause according to the author is your revenue deficit and not the fiscal deficit per se. Okay, so what is the way ahead? So on the question of revenue deficit and long-run view is also necessary. If you examine data for the last 20 years, revenue deficit had almost disappeared from the state budget before COVID-19. States in aggregate were generating revenue surpluses almost all the years during this period. However, the re-emergence of revenue deficit in recent years should take the focus back on the management of the revenue deficit by creating an incentive compatible framework. The following measures can be considered. So he is giving way ahead as well, suggestions as well. Fine. This is how the way of is expected to not just analyze the problem but give solution as well. So going forward, or the way forward would be interest-free loans to the states by the Indian government, if continued, may be linked to reduction in revenue deficit. This is what the government has done. It was announced that 1 lakh crore would be disbursed to the states as a 50 years. This free, free loans, of course, for the capital expenditure, capex this investment at the state level by the Indian government. Fine, and this has been extended in this year's this budget as well. Fine. So this is a good move, and this is what he is saying, that interest-free loans to the state by the Indian government, if continued, may be linked to reduction in revenue deficit. Of course, then they would not be needed to borrow more or expend more, especially on the revenue sides. Fine. This will help eliminate the possibility of substitution of the state's own capital spending and also prevent the diversion of borrowed resources to finance revenue expenditure. Fine. A defined path for revenue deficit reduction with a credible fiscal adjustment plan would help restore fiscal balance and improve quality of expenditure. So what else needed apart from this interest-free loans, especially for the capex purposes? A defined time path for revenue deficit reduction with a credible fiscal adjustment plan would also restore the fiscal balance and improve quality of expenditure. Further, a forward-looking performance incentive grants could also be considered for reduction of revenue deficit. In this context, different approaches provided by the earlier finance commissions can be considered to decide the framework of the incentive structure. In conclusion, we can say we need to get the focus back on the management of revenue deficit. For this, a macro view is essential. Right? Okay, so he is suggesting that a forward-looking performance incentive grant could be given to the states which are especially improving their fiscal health, especially which are reducing their revenue deficit. Fine, and this could be given under the finance commission. Different approaches, given by the different finance commission in the past as well, and even today, this revenue deficit grants being dispersed to the states, especially those states which are, this under let us say more pressure, or especially on the revenue account, fine, or under heavy pressure of, let us say, revenue deficit or revenue deficit. So of course they get the incentivization from the central government through the route of finance commission. Fine. So this could be further, continued. So this is a very good piece of article. I hope you could have understood this. Fine. A very good article in order to get the insights of the fiscal health of the states, particularly. We always talk most of the time we talk about the center. Now we talk about the states. Now this article is about antibiotics resistance basically. Antibiotics with promise a lifeline India awaits. So what author is saying in this? So what happened recently? An 18-year-old boy diagnosed with aggressive T-cell leukemia. What is T-cell? First of all, T-cell leukemia, I will come into that. So T-cells are basically our white blood cells. We have white blood cells and red blood cells. So white blood cells are T cells. Leukemia is basically it's an uncommon type of, remember, not that common, but uncommon type of blood cell cancer. Blood cell cancer. Fine. That is related to your white blood cells. That's right, T cells, because T cells are basically white blood cells. Fine. So what happened? This is a story of this Hyderabad, where an 18-year-old patient gravely fought not only aggressive T-cell leukemia but also formidable and resistant adversary, extensively drug-resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Okay. So this is basically an antibiotic, okay, multi-drug resistant MDR, to which we say means these are not even cured by the antibiotics. Fine, you need to come up with the different combinations of antibiotics, then only you can of course okay, further. Okay, so remember multi-drug resistance, as I am talking about, you might be aware of this. MDR is multi-drug resistant antibiotics. Means sometimes what happens when you keep on taking an antibiotic, then immune system responds as such that over the time that particular antibiotic becomes resistant. The antibiotics becomes resistant to this antibiotics that you were actually taking. So over the time what happens, these antibiotics become ineffective with respect to the antibiotics. Okay, so this is what happened, and this is a story related to this. So this is strain of Pseudomonas antibiotic, of course, and this is a one of the extensively drug resistant antibiotics. This is strain known for its high resistance to multiple antibiotics, left the medical team with limited and often ineffective treatment options. Despite the administration of last resort antibiotics, the patient's condition deteriorated. Persistent fever spikes and the infections assault on his lungs signaled a grave situation. The bacteria were literally eating up the patient's face. Time was running out and his life hung in the balance. Fine, this is how you can write the anecdotes basically in the essays, let us say UPSC, how you can introduce your basically first paragraph or introductory paragraph of UPSC. And Indian innovation. In their quest for lifeline, the doctors turned to a promising antibiotic, cefepime, zidibactam. Okay? So these were the combinations basically used by the doctors, developed by the Indian researchers. This antibiotic combines two active components to combat. So this is a combination of two different components, or of course active components to combat drug-resistant gram-negative pathogens, including Pseudomonas. Fine. While still undergoing phase 3 trials internationally, this Indian innovation has shown remarkable potential. Fine. So this is again, though internationally, the third round of trial is going related to this combination, but Indian innovation, this is what being labeled by author. So this shows an Indian innovation. Fine. Under a compassionate use protocol, the necessary approvals were obtained and the patient received this cefepime or cefepime, this zidibactam. Miraculously, signs of clinical improvement began to surface. The patient's fever subsided, blood cultures turned negative, and the need for oxygen diminished. Slowly but steadily, his strength returned, reigniting hope. So this extraordinary case underscores the urgent importance of granting EUA for antibiotics currently in phase 3 trials or licensed from other countries. So what are EUA? It is emergency use. It's an emergency use authorization basically. That when such kind of emergency develops, the authorities grants, like during COVID vaccines, emergency use authorization was granted as well. EUA is emergency use authorization. Right? So such kind of, under such situation, such kind of, even when your vaccine or let us say antibiotic is under trial, given emergency use authorization in order to save the patient. Okay, so a dire situation. Now, what is the situation of India currently with respect to this? Okay, so a dire situation. Infection specialists, intensivists, oncologists, those who this treats cancer, and doctors treating severe infections in critically ill and immunocompromised patients are confronted with grave reality: the scarcity of potent antibiotics to combat drug-resistant infections poses a direct threat to countless lives. It is distressing to witness patients succumb to infections just because the available antibiotics have lost their effectiveness due to rising resistance of the bacteria. So the dire situation faced by doctors as they grapple with drug-resistant infection is devastating reality that cannot be ignored. Each year, millions of lives are lost due to the inadequacy of available antibiotics in the face of these formidable pathogens. The relentless march of drug resistance has rendered once effective treatment ineffective. Fine. So I hope you have understood that. What exactly is the drug resistance? So when a particular, let us say, pathogen or bacteria are becoming resistant to, or it is that particular set of, let us say, these drugs are not now effective, which used to be earlier effective for the same set of, let us say, bacteria or pathogens or different sets of vectors. So of course this becomes ineffective, and that's why we refer it as drug resistant or multi-drug resistant. Okay. The challenges faced by the doctors in combating drug-resistant infections are multifaceted. They must navigate through a shrinking arsenal of effective antibiotics, leaving them with limited choices and often resorting to suboptimal treatments that may have significant side effects or offer little hope of the cure. So these are the negatives of such kind of drug resistance. The constant race against time, trying to stay one step ahead of the mutating bacteria, adds to the immense pressure and helplessness. So again, this is immense pressure and helplessness experienced by doctors on the front lines. In India, a nation that has demonstrated remarkable progress in granting EUA, that is emergency use authorization for COVID-19 vaccines now stands at a critical juncture. We must extend the same level of urgency and commitment to saving the lives of patients who may otherwise succumb to infections resistant to all currently available antibiotics. So it is true. So author is saying that the way India granted EUA, that is emergency use authorization, in an emergency situation like COVID-19 to the COVID vaccines, the similar kind of approach requires in order to save millions of lives from otherwise which might succumb to infection resistant to all currently available antibiotics. So it is true that several antibiotics are licensed within our country based on small clinical studies and of questionable benefit as well. Okay. We must recognize that what we truly need are powerful weapons to fight against drug resistance. Of course. Okay. Antibiotics that have been thoroughly evaluated or proven to be effective are essential in the battle against superbugs. Okay, so cafamine and jadibactam is shining example of India's scientific prowess, currently undergoing international phase 3 trials. This antibiotic has demonstrated its potential to save lives by recognizing the importance of cafamine jadibactam and expediting its EUA, that is emergency use authorization. We not only save lives within our borders but also extend a helping hand around the globe to countless individuals in desperate need of effective treatment options. So of course, India is referred to as the pharmacy of the world, and even during pandemic we have extended to more than 100 plus countries our Indian made this COVID vaccine. So of course the similar approach needs to be needs with respect to this cafamine jadibactam this drugs needed for treating the multi-drug resistant and this infections or immunocompromised infections, let us say, fine, especially which has been caused by bacteria. Okay, now made by Japan. So Japan has also made one of the these drugs, and that is named as cefiderocol. Cefiderocol, a licensed antibiotic in several countries developed by a Japanese company, has demonstrated excellent efficacy against drug-resistant infections. Fine. So in UPSC in previous exam, simply this name could be given to you and you could be asked that these were in news. These are related to, these are either the drugs, which treats the multi-drug resistant infections, or it is something. So all four options will be given different ones. Remember, these are the drugs which are effective in treating the multi-drug resistant infections. So it is disheartening that it remains unavailable within our country. The gravity of the cases faced by the patients in India demands access to this life-saving antibiotic, and we firmly believe it should be made accessible without delay. However, we must emphasize the importance of responsible and appropriate utilization of these medications. A collective decision by a team of experienced doctors, including infectious disease experts, should be made mandatory before initiating their use. This will ensure that these powerful antibiotics are administered to patients who will benefit the most by minimizing the risk of misuse or overuse. Of course, so these are the suggestions which we can look off. We implore. Now, implore is earnest request, or when you make emotional request under an emergency situation, we call it imploring. We implore. We make earnest requests to the authorities to recognize the urgent need for action and acknowledge the immense potential of these life-saving antibiotics by granting EU, that is emergency use authorization for cafamine and jadibactam, an Indian innovation, and cefiderocol, a globally recognized antibiotics. We can strengthen our arsenal against drug-resistant infections. So these two can be handy for treating the multi-drug resistant infections. Fine. Their inclusion in the EU list would not only empower doctors but also instill a renewed sense of hope and confidence among patients and their families as well. So as a nation, known for its scientific achievements, we have the opportunity to make substantial impact on the world stage through these drugs, multi-drug resistant infections. So through these two sets of drugs, we can again set the in our case, we have the opportunity to make substantial impact on the world's stage with respect to treating the multi-drug resistant infections. Fine. Okay. Again, another article in the next page is important. That is the lessons from. I want to discuss this, but not with respect to the particular this approach. So let us lessons from the fracas over food grains. Okay. So OMSs, you all know, we have discussed in detail. So what happened, since the discontinuation of OMSs means auctioning of food grains by FIC, not FIC but FCI, Food Corporation of India, in the open market, from where the states used to get the food grains at a cheaper rates. So FCI has discontinued. Fine, and after that there has been issue, of course, related to food security in Karnataka. So the Karnataka government decision to convert the promised Anna Bhagya scheme to a direct benefit transfer temporarily has brought into focus the limits of a state government's policy intervention on a crucial matter such as food security. So author is emphasizing on? Author is emphasizing on the guaranteed, this or the food security, especially the limits of state government's policy intervention on with respect to an important matter called food security. So basically, in this article, he is underlining the limitation of the states with respect to the food security, ensuring food security for the masses. So a serious problem. Under Anna Bhagya, Karnataka government scheme, the government had envisaged the provision of 5 kg of free rice per person per month to 4.42 crore beneficiaries, including 45 lakh Antyodaya Anna Yojana. Antyodaya Anna Yojana are basically the poorest among the poor card holders, and 3.58 lakh crore priority household card holders, and 39 lakh card holders belonging to Karnataka's own category of PHs. This was in addition to the regular entitlements to the beneficiaries under NFSA. The state, that is National Food Security Act 2013, the state would have required around 2.3 lakh metric tons of rice every month to meet this commitment. The FCI had agreed on June 12 to supply the quantity under the open market operation scheme domestic OMSSD for July, but the center had different plan. So center decided to discontinue this, though FCI has agreed, but should not be the case like that where your agency has agreed and now you are discontinuing. But of course, central government has discontinued not because of any, but of course, a valid reason as well. But the central had different plan. Anna Bhagya, which was to be launched on July 1, ran into a serious problem on June 13 when the Union Food Ministry discontinued the sale of rice and wheat under OMSSD, that is domestic, to all state governments with exceptions. Karnataka had planned to utilize OMSSD to implement the scheme, which was one of the 5 pre-poll guarantees of the Congress party. Fine. So of course this was poll gimmicks. Though the OMSS is made for the sale of surplus. Now what is OMSS? So we have already discussed it, but again for a quick revision, OMSS is made for the sale of surplus stocks of wheat and rice at the predetermined prices through e-auctions in the open market to improve the supply of food grains and control the price line. States have generally been allowed to purchase the surplus stock without e-auctions. The OMSS is now limited to accommodate small and marginal buyers and traders. The quantity that a builder can purchase in the single bid range from 10 to 100 quintals reduced. Already we have discussed it when we explained the OMSS actually. Fine. So this is empty, that is metric tons, 10 to 100 metric tons only can be bought. The central decision took several states, especially rice deficit ones, by surprise. OMSS is one of the routes they use to supplement their allocation. The suddenness of the decision especially hit Karnataka, which had begun preparations to launch the scheme in anticipation of the FCI's help. This is how the things goes wrong. Had there been an effective communication system in place between the Union Food and Public Distribution Department and the FCI, a statutory body under the central government, the whole controversy could have been avoided. So here the major issue is underlying is the miscommunication or between the Union Food and Public Nutrition Ministry and the FCA. And statutory body, of course, while suggestions were made to provide ragi and jowar, both grown in parts of Karnataka, to partially meet the proposed demand, these two would have posed supply constraints as the quantity required was substantial. Because we are covering crores of beneficiaries under this, so of course we need substantial quantity in order to ensure the same. Of course, the center has its own compulsions in restricting the availability of food grains under OMSSD. The quarterly stock position of the rice and wheat in the central pool as on April 1st, 2023 was the lowest in the last 3 years. So this is one of the key reason why actually the central government discontinued the OMSSD. Fine. So this is a valid reason because central pool has been one of the lowest in the last 3 years, despite being much higher than the level prescribed in the food grains stock norms. Uncertainty regarding the southwest monsoon and onsetting of El Nino impact and the possible impact of an adverse monsoon on the production of food grains are factors that the authorities must have considered before taking the decision to restrict supply. So of course this could be said as a rational decision, fine on the grounds of all this, but let us see to what extent doctor is So all this only justifies the need for more broad-based consultations, besides whether it is feasible to rely on private traders to bring down the price for those not covered under the NFS. This is a moot question. Moot question is विचार करने लायक कोई सवाल है, and this is whether it is feasible to rely on private traders to bring down the price for those not covered under the NFSA. There is one difference between the present and the immediate past. The Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, implemented in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, is no longer in force. This scheme had provided 5 kg of free food grains per person per month from the central pool to Antyodaya Anna Yojana and priority household. Okay, card holders all over India. So of course you know that during the pandemic, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, Anna Yojana basically was announced in order to give additional 5 kg of free food grains apart from the NFSA mandated 5 kg of food grains. So this has been discontinued now. The episode has delivered a key message to the states. So what are the key messages? That they must have their own mechanism in place before launching any scheme. This is a very, very good message. Even if there had been no road between central and Karnataka government, the sustainability of Anna Bharat was questionable. So he's saying that even though we consider that, even though there would have been no issues or conflict, or let us say no opposition government in Karnataka had the BJP only returned in Karnataka, then still such kind of scheme becomes quite unsustainable. So sustainability of Anna Bharat was questionable, as supply only through OMSSD would not have been sufficient. On average, about 16 lakh tons were drawn in total by all the players in the country from 2018 to 2023. The highest quantity of about 24.6 lakh tons was drawn in 2020 and 21, the first year of the COVID-19, but Karnataka would have needed about 27.5 lakh tons annually. You see, the highest quantity of about 24.6 lakh tons was drawn in 2020 and 21, but on an average, this was just 6 lakh tons between 2018 and 2022 in the previous 4 years. But the highest were 24.6 lakh tons in the year 2020-21. But the scheme that Karnataka has launched, needed 27.5 lakh tons annually. You see, crossing this maximum 24.6 lakh tons of drawn under this this whole drawn by the whole states. So somewhere you see this figure becomes unsustainable. Fine, because we are demanding too much, more than even the supply. About 1.5 lakh tons had in the state's allocation under the NFSA for 2023-24. So total states जो states की allocation है कर्नाटक की उससे 1.5 lakh tons more. Thus the states must consider the macro picture to ascertain the practicality of their new schemes. The centre indeed has reason to be worried if every other state promises a scheme of its own in the food sector, based on the expectation that the central government and FCI will come to its rescue without any regard for the emerging reality. So this is a very good lesson for the states to learn, and that too timely. Because if each of the states come and makes such kind of announcements, in pre-poll announcements, of course, which is quite unsustainable, then of course it will be a very create a very big issue or problem of food security at the India level. Of course, if the states do not exercise discipline and such trend goes unchecked, the country would not have comfortable stock, let alone surplus. Also, the problem was not only of availability but also the cost. The FCA had reportedly agreed to supply grains to Karnataka at 36.6 per kg. Assuming that the required quantity was obtained at this cost, the monthly outgo would have been about 840 crores. 840 crore for the Karnataka government. Monthly, remember. Not an instrument of politics. There is no crisis as of now on the food grains front, but the present situation should serve as a lesson to all political players to exercise moderation by making electoral promises. Find a very good lesson, especially on matters concerning food security. Also, they should stop viewing food grains as an instrument of politics and begin to take an objective appraisal of programs such as Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana and Anna Bhagya scheme of Karnataka. Fine. So I would suggest you to please do read and revise this article and use this selectively in your GS, integrate with the GS syllabus. Of course, on the GS3, whenever we talk about the food security. This is a very good article because nowadays political parties are announcing lots of freebies and all, coming up with the populist announcements, fine, without carrying off their sustainable, even budget, fine. So again, a very good piece of article. Please do read and revise the same. Okay. So moving to the miscellaneous news. Okay. Politics only. Okay, traditional way of living of tribals has to be protected, said by Jharkhand governor. Indeed, Jharkhand governor come name CP Radhakrishnan. Fine. Then again, politics only. You can skip these pages. Court 6 minor wrestlers reply to this. Okay. Again, politics involved. Same central status over OMSS, that what we have discussed just with respect to the Anna Bhagya scheme of Karnataka. So take a spotlight of the food ministers meet. So of course we expect some solutions, but we have landed on the world, this news world page. Remember, yesterday we had discussion with the Israeli-Janine attack with respect to the Palestinian this issue, and Stoltenberg to remain at NATO help for another year. NATO Secretary General is Jens Stoltenberg will stay in office for another year. So just remember this much, that who is the NATO. Yesterday only we discussed an article related to NATO and NATO Plus and India's role there. So of course, it's become important that we remember the name of NATO Secretary General, and the name is Jens Stoltenberg. Yes. Okay, moving to the next page. Okay. Now the sports page. Okay. So I think we have covered the important articles or the important things today from the 5th of July 2023, the Hindu analysis. If you have any issue, any inquiry, you can put the same in the comment section. Fine. Until then, take care, keep revising, fine, and stay tuned for tomorrow Hindu analysis. Thank you.